or indeed that there might be enough Tory rebels to vote down whatever the new series of measures are that the Prime Minister wants to bring in to control the coronavirus. We're going to speak now, though, to Tory MP Sir Bob Neill, Conservative MP for Bromley and Chislehurst. Sir Bob, a very good morning to you. Welcome.
Good morning, Mike.
Thanks very much for joining us. There's a very strange kind of feeling out there in the streets of this country at the moment. Nobody's quite sure what's going on. Some people think that we need to have more lockdown measures. Other people seem to think that we need to have less. There's no doubt that there's a disagreement inside the Conservative Party. What's your view, Sir Bob, on what we should be doing?
Well, I think what we've got to do, first of all, is to make sure we get the balance right between protecting public health and preventing the spread of the virus, which we all accept, but also making sure that we don't wreck the economy in the process and actually wreck just as many lives potentially in the process as well. Because I've got a real concern that the damage that's being done by lost jobs, by mental health problems that people, particularly the lonely and the vulnerable, are finding, and also the stress that's created by unemployment potentially, and the number of missed medical appointments that I picked up from practitioners in my area, all of that is potentially going to, in the long term, be as damaging. So that leads me to the conclusion that we've got to have a proper debate in Parliament before we go down the route of further draconian measures.
Yes, I think you would get certainly my support for that and the support of many listeners to Talk Radio. What about the Brady Amendment as such? Because there's a bit of confusion, I think, perhaps you can clear it up for us, that if the Brady Amendment doesn't go ahead and the Speaker decides it can't be taken on board, will there still be a chance for Tory MPs to vote down the government's bill?
Well, yes, because the way these motions are drawn up, and it's a bit arcane, you're right, Mike, is unless the Speaker is prepared to, I think, and I hope he will, be flexible about the rules. If you adopted a very strict application, it's a straight yes-no question. Do you renew these very extensive powers under the Coronavirus Act, which we passed in a hurry 6 months and more ago now, when perhaps it was very necessary? But we would, if need be, have to vote against renewal of those powers. Now, I don't want to have to do that, but I do want a clear mechanism whereby we can vote on those powers either before they're used or immediately thereafter. It's not good enough to give the government a carte blanche to take decisions which can profoundly affect people's lives with no ability to review it either beforehand or really quickly thereafter, so that you can change things if it's clearly going wrong.
Yes, and as of this moment in time, do you feel, Sir Bob, that you might have enough numbers to vote that bill down?
Well, I believe there are very significant numbers, and also, of course, the opposition parties, I think, are sympathetic to this as well. And this isn't about rubbishing the science. I don't go as far as my friend Des around that, but it's remembering that there's a balance. You know, scientific advisors are there to advise. It's for ministers and politicians to take these decisions, and that means, to my mind, ultimately for Parliament to take those decisions, because it's our constituents we've got to look in the face as to those very hard trade-offs that we have to make under these circumstances. And I don't think we can park that upon reliance upon one set of experts, one way or the other.
No, indeed.
We'd be ducking our job.
Exactly. And I think the government has been led to a very large extent by these scientists, many of whom are making predictions about things that could happen in a worst case scenario. And I know, we've been through the Brexit situation where everybody knows that there are worst case scenarios predicted for a reason, but it doesn't mean that you have to be guided by those, and it doesn't mean that you have to make policy based on those, surely.
No, they're just one of the factors that you take into account. And what I'm concerned about is that we've perhaps certainly give the impression of having paid too much reliance to those sort of drastic medical scenarios. Indeed, not all medics share that view, but not paid enough attention to the people that I'm finding in my constituency coming to me and saying, look, I'm in the hospitality sector. We've fallen through the gaps in the Chancellor's otherwise very good job support schemes. We've been running a business. I can think of a half dozen have been in contact with me over the last week or so, and we are going to go under as a consequence of this. And this means people out of work. It means people's lives wrecked. It means sometimes a lifetime's work going under. I think of a travel firm in my constituency, been going 30 odd years. They're on the brink. Now, those are lives ruined as well. And I think that we're not paying enough attention to that.
No, exactly right. Because at some point or other, you have to take the view that subsidising everything, and even when you can't subsidise everyone, you can still, and the Treasury, I think, has been remarkably adept at saving an awful lot of people's livelihoods, but they can't do it forever. There is no bottomless pit of money, and the taxpayer eventually will be called upon to make it all up.
That's entirely right, and full marks to the Chancellor for what he has done. But you can't create a permanent dependency culture. That's not healthy.
No.
It's not sustainable either. If you want a good health service, you can only do that if you've got a decent economy. If you bust the economy, in the long term, it'll be the health service, education, all the other public services that will suffer just as much as anything else.
Yes, and a lot of people this morning, Sir Bob, exercised about some of these things that were brought in yesterday, which we weren't really told about. For example, this business of 85 decibels. I'm told a basic vacuum cleaner is 75 decibels, so anything music-wise louder than that is now apparently going to be punishable by some kind of fine. You can't have mass singing in pubs, which is presumably bad news for football fans. You can't go outside if you're supposed to be quarantining. You're going to get money you're going to get fined if you maliciously dob somebody in it. I mean, there's all kinds of rules being made. As I said, it feels as though someone's broken into my house overnight and put a camera inside it.
Yeah, I think there's a real danger of overkill with some of this. There's some science, I'm told, around singing, whether that makes transition more likely. I can't see how, as you say, decibels of itself are not conscious that playing loud music makes you yourself more likely to catch coronavirus. It may be aimed at parties, but let's find a more sensible way of dealing with that, for heaven's sake. I just don't. That's exactly the sort of thing that ought to have a proper debate, rather than just being dished out on a plate.
But also, it seems like, to me, rules being made by people who've never had any fun in their lives. And looking at Boris Johnson, I'm rather surprised at him. A guy who is very hail fellow, well met, formerly was the life and soul of the party, now wants to kill everything off.
Well, it is counterintuitive, isn't it? Because Boris is a pretty liberal, open-minded sort of person. One of the reasons I supported him.
He used to be. I don't know what's happened to him.
Yeah, well, there is a danger that you do get a bit captured, I think, by people who've been in the public sector all their life, never had to meet a bottom line, who may be very dedicated public servants, but do have to realise that that's not the way the whole of society lives, wants to live, or can live their lives.
There needs to be some kind of roadmap out of it, doesn't there?
Yeah, there does. And that's the bit that we've still not had. I mean, again, I say the Chancellor's done a great job at the immediate stuff of trying to keep the show on the road, but we do need to move to the next step as actually what's the plan, how we move out of this, because this cannot be the new normal. I mean, people talk about we've got to get used to living in this with a new normal. Now, that can't be at the price of a restricted way of life.
No, it's a very strange world at the moment. I got on the tube this morning, and there's people piling off one train onto an escalator. They're all wearing masks. Nobody's really talking to one another. It's a very weird world that we've created. Yeah,
we're actually damaging ourselves in the long term, I think, as a people. Give an example. A friend of mine was saying that in their road, it's a nice little, quite suburban road. They were just walking along, just a couple of weeks ago now, 3 weeks ago, and somebody's little kid came the other way, and they sort of slightly shrank away from this other person on the pavement.
Right.
Because they've almost been drummed into them to be scared of going close to people. That's not natural. That's just not natural.
No, it's really not.
Get away from that.
And I was encouraged, actually, by Rishi Sunak last week when he said in Parliament, we should not be living in fear. And I thought to myself, is this now perhaps a bit of a move from the position that Boris Johnson was occupying on Tuesday to a new position where we can say, and we can use our senior cabinet ministers to say to people, don't be afraid of this?
I hope so. And I hope Boris will say, we'll recognise, go back to his natural instincts. Of trusting people. Trust people's common sense. Don't try and create some massive nanny state. We'll all be responsible. Of course, there are some rules that you have to have. People don't, we're not saying chuck it all out of the window, the various rules, but let's be proportionate about it. Let's debate it sensibly, and let's recognise that there are trade-offs, and some of the trade-offs actually have to go in favour of the economy, in favour of theatre, of arts, of sport. Of trying to keep the normal way of life going. Otherwise, you end up with a society long-term damaged.
And I worry, Bob, that there's a lot of people who quite like it the way it is. And I don't know why they do, but some people seem to be quite happy with it.
Yeah, I do think that's the case. It's surprising, and I think that's, again, it's a rather dangerous tendency for people to get hold of. There isn't a free ticket, for life in these things. You can't get into this idea that this is wonderful. We've got an almost permanent paid holiday sort of thing. That's not healthy.
Yeah.
You can't have a world in which you only interact online.
Yeah.
In which your life revolves around the screen like we're doing at the moment.
Right. No, I know, it's ridiculous. I mean, I spoke to a guy yesterday up in Scotland who is an oil worker from the North Sea, who's been on furlough basically since March. And he says he wants to go back to work, but he can't go back to work because they can't safeguard the helicopters, they can't safeguard the dorm rooms where they sleep on the oil rigs, and he's basically having to think about looking for another job. Yeah,
no, it's having all manner of, I think, silly effects. At the end of the day, it's a real risk of overkill with these things, and it's a problem when you get really eminent scientists, and no doubt very bright people. But I've also found, like a lot of these things, there can be a bit of tunnel vision in this.
And there is a worry sort of globally as well for the Tory party, I think, given the red wall seats that were won so well back in December of last year. A lot of new MPs in the House for the first time from parts of England which have never had Tory representation. There's a big problem if those all disappear at the next election because of Boris Johnson's actions.
Absolutely. I mean, I've got some very good friends there amongst the new group. They're really keen, and they're worried because, their people are perhaps suffering even more than we have down in London. So far, and they were there on the basis that we were going to try and pull up those areas, that we were going to try and rebuild the economy that had been neglected and left behind. Well, you can hardly do that if you're squashing what business activity there is. And as has happened recently, done, it seems, without any real notice to the local council leaders and the people who are actually trying to run the show on the ground.
Exactly right. So Bob Neal, thank you very much indeed. Conservative MP for Bromley and Chislehurst, one of those who will be pressing the government to ensure that these new measures that are brought in, if they are brought in, are not brought in without due care and attention, without any kind of conversation, without any kind of debate, and just the will of Boris Johnson and the Cabinet.